I was 23 the last time I attended a Hartman family reunion. I still remember the heat of that afternoon, the smell of barbecued ribs drifting through the backyard, and the way the folding tables were lined with name cards. Everyone had one. My brother Andrew, my sister Claudia, cousins, uncles, even neighbors who barely qualified as family. Everyone except me. There was no card with Isabella written on it. I stood awkwardly near the drink table until my mother, Patricia, brushed past, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "Don't make a scene. Sit at the children's table, if you must." The children's table, plastic chairs, paper cups, sticky juice boxes. I was in my 20s, fresh out of college, trying to start my career, and still being treated as the unwanted extra. My father, Gregory, avoided my eyes as he raised a toast to family unity. Andrew cracked jokes about me being the stray. Claudia smirked, and the rest laughed because that's what you do when the favored children lead. I stayed long enough to eat one plate of food, then slipped out without goodbye. Nobody noticed. Nobody followed. That was 15 years ago. Since then, my life had split in two. The first half, defined by their rejection, the second by my determination never to need them again. I took the ruby ring my grandmother, Margaret Grace, pressed into my palm, and the $5,000 she insisted I keep, for when the world gets cruel, and I left. It was supposed to be a temporary escape, but escape turned into exile, exile into reinvention. I worked nights in coffee shops and days coding in borrowed offices. My only furniture was a mattress on the floor and a desk made of stacked milk crates. I didn't have connections, but I had clarity. If my own family could discard me, then I had nothing left to lose. That kind of freedom burns hot. By 30, I launched Heart Secure, a cybersecurity startup nobody believed in. By 35, it was worth hundreds of millions. By 38, I was signing contracts with global banks and governments. My name appeared in magazines that had once featured my siblings for charity galas. The irony wasn't lost on me. And now, standing at the balcony of my glass-walled mansion, looking out over the hills, I felt the strangest mix of triumph and ache. I had everything, yet somewhere deep down, I still remembered the sting of that empty chair. That memory returned sharper than ever when the intercom buzzed that morning. Margaret, my loyal house manager, appeared at the doorway of my study, brows lifted. "Isabella, they're here." "They?" I asked, though my chest already knew the answer. "Your family," she said. "Your parents, your brother, your sister, all of them. They're at the gate." Before we continue, please subscribe my channel for such more stories, and let us know where you are listening in the comments. For a long moment, I didn't move. The only sound was the quiet hum of my computer screen. 15 years of silence, and now, uninvited, they appeared. I walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, and saw them through the surveillance feed. Gregory in a suit too polished for a casual visit, Patricia clutching a designer purse, Andrew leaning against the gate with practiced charm, Claudia adjusting her sunglasses like she owned the sun. They had not come to apologize. They had come because they had seen my name on the Fortune 500 list last month. They had come for the wealth, not for me. The old ache stirred, but so did something stronger. Eleanor's ruby ring glinted on my finger, a reminder of the only family member who had ever believed in me. I turned to Margaret. "Let them wait," I said. My voice was calm, but inside, a storm I had waited years to unleash began to gather. For 15 years, they had excluded me. Now they stood outside my gates. This time, the choice was mine. I let them wait 12 full minutes, not out of cruelty, out of calibration. For 15 years, I had stood outside their rooms, their tables, their conversations. 12 minutes wasn't revenge. It was a reset. From the security feed, their choreography was familiar. Gregory checked his watch every 60 seconds, like punctuality could buy history. Patricia kept reapplying lipstick, the universal signal for, "We are about to perform concern." Andrew leaned on the iron scrollwork and tried to look bored. Claudia curated angles on her phone until she caught the lens and softened into sisterly. Visitor protocol? I asked. Margaret nodded. Cameras rolling, audio on. Guest log ready if you want it signed. I slipped on a linen blazer and the ruby ring, then walked the stone path to the gate. The glass of the house reflected back a woman I barely recognized as the girl at the children's table. Same eyes, different spine. Isabella, Patricia breathed. Fingers splayed against the bars, as if we were in a melodrama. You look successful. That's not a compliment, Claudia murmured, smile fixed. It's an observation. Gregory stepped forward. We're here to make things right. Define right, I said, voice level. And define we. Last time I checked, we was a pronoun that required presence. Andrew laughed a little too loudly. Come on, open the gate. We're family. Gate stays closed, I said. We can talk here, 15 minutes. This lane is city property. My side is not. Cameras are on. Keep your hands where I can see the narrative. Gregory's jaw flexed. Patricia blinked fast, manufacturing damp. We've missed you, she said. There's a reunion next month. We want you there, and we could use your guidance. Andrew's startup hit a cash crunch. Claudia's boutique. Retail is hard. The house needs repairs, we thought. You thought success comes with a family plan, I said. Like health insurance, but for choices. Gregory folded his arms. We're not asking for a handout, an investment, shares, a board seat. You could mentor Andrew. I run a cybersecurity company, I said. We have a zero trust model. No implicit permission. Access is earned, not inherited. That applies here, Claudia laughed through her nose. You're comparing us to hackers. I'm comparing behavior to behavior, I said. 15 years of it is a decent sample size. Andrew's charm cracked. You can drop the TED Talk, We know why you're doing this. You want to punish us. I want to protect what I built, I said, including my peace. Patricia tried a different script. We were young, overwhelmed. Your father was between jobs. Your grandmother interfered. You know how she was. My grandmother slipped me $5,000 in a ring, I said. Interference looks different from where I stood. Gregory leaned closer to the bars. Listen. A small loan. Bridge us through the quarter. We'll pay interest. Family rate. Family rate, I repeated. At the last reunion you gave me a children's chair. Silence found the cracks between us and settled. I took a breath and laid out the terms the way I would in a boardroom. If you want relationship, here are the conditions. 1. Apologies in writing, not performed at a gate. 2. No requests for money, equity, or introductions. 3. If there are children who need school fees, food, or medical care, I'll fund those directly through verified institutions with oversight. 4. All conversations for the next 90 days happen by email. If you break any of these, the process ends. That is my zero trust policy for family. Patricia's mouth trembled. Gregory's brows lifted as if I had offered an insult in a foreign language. Andrew scoffed. You're unbelievable. Claudia, to her credit, looked rattled rather than outraged. What if we agree? Then you send your first message to the address on this card. I slid a heart-secure contact card through the gap, one I used when I wanted a paper trail. Subject line, intent. Define what you want without the words money, equity, shares, introductions, or quick favor. Try honesty. It ages better. Gregory didn't take the card. Patricia did, fingers shaking like a new pianist's. Also, I added, if you attempt to approach the house without notice again, security will ask you to leave. If you bring press, my counsel will respond. If you threaten, we record. Clarity helps everyone. Andrew stared past me at the house. The glass, the sweep of lawn, the sculpture catching sun like an obedient star. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said quietly. It makes me safer than I used to be. He flinched. Claudia looked down. Gregory cleared his throat, grasping for dignity. We'll be in touch. Email, I said. They turned. Kwei. The curb, Patricia glanced back, a flash of something almost human softening her face. You really won't come to the reunion? I've hosted one for years, I said, and watched confusion crease her brow. Attendance has been excellent. When their car disappeared down the hill, Margaret exhaled. You were surgical. I was explicit, I said. Surgery implies I wanted to fix them. We walked back to the house. Inside the foyer, I signed the visitor log I'd had printed after my first magazine cover. Date, names, purpose, outcome. Hartman family, unscheduled. Ask, money, access, response, boundaries. I closed the book and felt steadier. On my desk upstairs, a framed photograph of the old apartment waited. Milk crate desk, thrift store lamp, a post-it on the wall with a list that had felt impossible then. File paperwork, finish prototype, pitch, sleep, repeat. I touched the glass. That girl had built the gate they stood behind today. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Valerie Brooks, mentor and first real believer. Heard there were visitors. Proud of you. Coffee tomorrow? Another from Jonathan Reed, my original investor. Press sniffing around a family reconciliation. Want me to kill it? No leaks, I replied. No quotes. If they want a story, they can write me an email like everyone else. At dusk, I stood again on the balcony. The hills were turning the color of cooled bronze. Somewhere a coyote called, thin and defiant. The ache of the children's table visited, and then kept going, like a train that no longer stopped here. Margaret brought tea. You set terms, she said. Most people never get to. Most people don't build their own door, I said. Maybe, she said, smiling. But most people also don't have the sense to keep it locked. We clinked cups lightly. Down at the gate, the red light on the camera winked its steady dot, writing its little record in the dark. I didn't know if an email would come, or a headline, or silence. But for the first time in years, I liked all three options. Tomorrow there would be code to review, contracts to sign, and a foundation meeting about grants for kids who'd never had place cards either. Tonight, there was a house that echoed with my footsteps because it was mine, a ring that caught the last light because someone once believed I would need proof, and a policy that finally applied to more than servers. Zero trust wasn't cold. It was care, measured and earned. And at my gate, at last, it was law. The first email came 3 days later. The subject line read, Intent. The sender, Patricia Hartman. My mother, who had last sent me anything when dial-up internet still hissed in the background. I didn't open it right away. I sat at my desk, sipping coffee that had gone cold, staring at the word as if it might detonate. Intent. Eleanor's ruby ring pressed cool against my finger as I clicked. Isabella, it began. We've thought about your conditions. We agree. We want to rebuild. Please come to dinner. We promise no money talk, no business, just family. I read it twice, then slid my chair back. Dinner, I muttered, the syllables tasting like theater. Margaret came in with her dusting cloth still in hand. You've got that look, she said. They want me at dinner, I said. They always want you at dinner, she replied dryly. Dinner is where negotiations happen. Ask anyone who's ever signed a bad lease. I smiled despite myself. They promised. Promises are just invitations in disguise, she said, tucking the cloth into her apron. You taught me that. Zero trust, remember? She was right, but some part of me, some sliver of that girl at the children's table, still wanted to test the promise. So I replied. Dinner is declined. Written apologies first, then maybe coffee in public. Cameras on. An hour later, another email arrived. This time from Andrew. Come on. You've made your point. We're serious. Claudia's even offering to host. It'll be good press for you if nothing else. Everyone loves a reunion story. Good press. There it was. The true intent. Uncloaked. I forwarded it to Harold, my attorney, who replied within minutes. They're baiting you. Decline. Keep the record clean. The next evening, Claudia tried her version. A glossy card arrived by courier, embossed in gold. Hartman Family Gala, celebrating unity. On the back, in her handwriting, your chair is waiting, front and center. I laughed out loud. Front and center, I told Margaret, holding up the card. 15 years ago, I couldn't get a folding chair. Now they want me in spotlight. Margaret peered at the card. Gold embossing is expensive. Desperation dressed in foil. I pinned the invitation to my bulletin board under the label Evidence. That weekend, I drove into the city to meet Dr. Valerie Brooks, the mentor who had given me my first serious chance. She listened while I explained the dinner invitation, the emails, the gala card. They're probing the fence, Valerie said, stirring her tea. That's what families like this do. They want to see where the gate bends. I don't want to bend, I said, but part of me still wants them to see you, she finished gently. That's human, but being seen is not the same as being valued. Her words landed deep. On the drive home, I thought about that difference. For years, I had built a company that valued every line of code, every security audit. Yet with my family, I still craved the illusion of being seen. When I got back, Margaret handed me an envelope left at the gate. Inside was a photo, me at 9, holding a birthday cake, both parents smiling behind me. A sticky note in Claudia's handwriting was attached. We remember. I traced the edges of the photo, then set it down on my desk beside Eleanor's note. The one she'd left me years ago. You owe yourself a record. I opened my journal, Record of Daylight, and wrote, they remember what suits them. I remember everything. That night, the mansion was silent except for the faint hum of the security cameras, writing their own small record in the dark. The embossed card stayed on my bulletin board for 2 weeks. Pinned like a butterfly, I had no intention of reviving. But Claudia's emails multiplied. First reminders, then flattery, then the veiled guilt she'd always wielded so well. Everyone's coming. It would mean the world. People are asking about you. People, not family. People. Harold advised against attending. Margaret reminded me that zero trust wasn't a slogan. It was a policy. But in the end, curiosity won. Not curiosity about their intentions. I knew those. Curiosity about my own strength. Could I step into their theater without handing them the script? So I RSV'd. I'll attend. 1 hour. Cameras on. No discussions of business or money. If any condition is breached, I leave immediately. The night of the gala, the Hartman estate looked the same as it had 15 years ago. Stone facade lit by floodlights. Valet attendants ushering cars up the circular drive. Inside, chandeliers glowed too brightly, as if money could be polished into warmth. I walked in wearing a navy silk dress and the ruby ring. Heads turned. Conversations paused. For a moment, I was not Isabella the exile. I was Isabella the headline. Claudia swept over, all sequins and perfume. You came, she trilled, kissing the air near my cheek. Front and center, just like I promised. We've missed you. I smiled thinly. I'm here, for 1 hour. The dining room was set with long tables draped in white linen. At the head table, a card waited. Isabella Hartman. Not tucked to the side, not hidden at the children's table. Center. Gregory rose with his wine glass. A toast, he announced, voice booming. To family, whole again at last. Whole. The word twisted. I stayed seated, hands folded, letting the silence stretch before I answered. Whole implies nothing was missing. That hasn't been my experience. Awkward laughter fluttered. Claudia jumped in, raising her glass higher. To new beginnings, then. The first course arrived. Silver domes lifted with flourish. But beneath the cloche of charm, the script was obvious. Between bites of lobster bisque, Andrew leaned close. So is. Heart Secure is expanding. We were thinking, what if we collaborated? Family brand synergy. There it was. The real meal. I set down my spoon. Andrew, You breached the condition. Business talk. The hour ends now. Gasps traveled the table like static. Patricia reached across, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. Don't go. Please, we didn't mean... But I stood, slow and steady. Cameras flashed. Reporters they had clearly invited to capture the reunion. I turned toward them, letting the room witness. For 15 years, I was excluded from these tables, I said, voice carrying over the clink of cutlery. Now you invite me, not out of love, but because my name looks good on your programs. Family is not a prop. Family is presence, and presence is something you abandoned years ago. The room fell silent except for the shutters of cameras. I picked up my clutch, adjusted the ruby ring, and walked out. Outside, the night air tasted like freedom. My car pulled up, Margaret at the wheel. She had insisted. How was it? She asked. Short, I said, and exactly long enough. At home, I opened my record of daylight and wrote. They offered a seat at their table. I declined the script. Their theater is not my home. For the first time in years, the ache of the children's table began to fade. Not because they had changed, but because I had. By morning, the tabloids had done their work. Headlines lined my phone like unwelcome guests. Heiress storms out of family gala. Cold daughter snubs parents' olive branch. Reunion ends in drama at Hartman estate. I sat at the kitchen island, coffee steaming, phone buzzing non-stop. Margaret slid the paper across the counter. They fed the press before dessert was cleared. She was right. The gala hadn't been about reconciliation. It had been about optics. Invite the prodigal daughter, get her under chandeliers, let the cameras flash. If I stayed, I'd be complicit. If I left, they had their headline. Either way, they wrote the script. But this time, I had my own stage. I opened my laptop and logged into the foundation portal, the Eleanor Grace Fund, named for the grandmother who had slipped me money when no one else would. In 15 years, it had grown into a machine for scholarships, housing, after-school programs, a quiet empire of daylight. I drafted a press release. Heart Secure CEO expands Foundation for Forgotten Youth. It included a short statement, my first public words about family. When the people meant to include you choose exclusion instead, you learn the true meaning of presence. This foundation exists to make sure no child feels that absence. I hit send. Within hours, financial blogs, charity columns, and even the same tabloids that had mocked me were quoting it. The story was no longer about a stormed-out gala. It was about a woman turning scars into structure. That afternoon, Harold called. Brilliant, he said. They wanted you to look petty. Instead, you look principled. But not everyone was pleased. At dusk, the gate intercom buzzed. Andrew's voice crackled through, brittle with anger. Nice stunt is... Using the foundation to smear us. I pressed the button. Truth isn't smear, Andrew. And you should thank me. I didn't use names. Silence. Then Claudia's voice, sharper. Do you know how bad this makes us look? Reputation is earned, I said. Just like trust. Just like access. Gregory cut in, voice low. Don't think you've won. Families find ways to adjust balance. Margaret reached over and disconnected the line before I could reply. She shook her head. Threats from behind a gate are just noise. Keep the record clean. That night, I opened Record of Daylight and pasted the clippings. Tabloid headlines beside the foundation release. I wrote underneath. They told one story. I told another. The world chose mine. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift. I wasn't defending against their narrative anymore. I was defining my own. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The legal letter arrived in a cream envelope sealed with unnecessary flourish. Margaret found it on the doorstep. No courier this time, just slipped under the gate like contraband. She set it on my desk without comment, the way you'd lay down a snake in a glass box. Inside was a demand drafted by their new attorney. They claimed defamation by implication, citing my foundation statement. They wanted a retraction, damages, and most telling of all, Constructive engagement in ongoing family matters. I almost laughed. They hadn't just hired a lawyer, they'd hired a playwright. I scanned the letter, then called Harold. He listened in silence, then gave his verdict. Empty theater. No standing, no case. But they're escalating, which means we escalate daylight. After we hung up, I pulled Eleanor's blue archival box from the study shelf. She had left me folders labeled for every eventuality. One I hadn't opened yet read in her neat script. If they lawyer up. Inside, contracts, notarized statements, and a binder of board minutes from HeartSecure's early days. Notes in the margins documented every cent of startup funding, every investor signature. At the very front was a single page Eleanor had written herself. Isabella, if they ever claim you built success on family neglect, remember, your foundation stands taller than their absence. Keep every record. They will try shadows. Answer only with light. I touched the page as if it were her hand. That evening, Daniel stopped by. He found me surrounded by files. The mansion lit only by desk lamps. Research or defense, he asked. Both, I said. They sent a letter. He skimmed it, lips tightening. They don't even believe this. They're testing how much noise you'll tolerate. I've tolerated worse, I said quietly. When I was 13, they tested how much silence I could survive. Daniel sat across from me. So what's the move? Daylight, I said, and pushed the binder toward him. We go public. Not about them, about HeartSecure, about transparency. Show the paper trail, show the clean growth, show the receipts before they even hint otherwise. 2 days later, we released a shareholder update. Every round of funding, every audited report, every compliance certificate. It wasn't standard practice for a private firm, but I made it standard. Analysts praised the radical openness. Investors called it visionary. The markets responded with trust. My family responded with silence. But silence is never empty. It carries intent. And 1 week later, Margaret found another envelope at the gate. This one wasn't legal. It was personal. A photo, folded and worn. Me at 17, standing at a bus stop with my backpack, the day I left home. Written on the back in Claudia's looping script. We never thought you'd make it this far. For the first time in months, my hands shook. Not from fear, from recognition. They hadn't come to reconcile. They had come to rewrite. I placed the photo in record of daylight, taping it beside Eleanor's note. Underneath I wrote, they want to adjust the balance. But balance is built on weight, and I hold the heavier record. That night, I locked the study and walked the halls. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt like a witness, and I knew when the next move came, it wouldn't be through paper. It would be in person. The next move didn't come in an envelope. It came with headlights cutting across the lawn at midnight. Margaret woke me with a knock. They're at the gate, she whispered, voice flat but urgent. I slipped on my robe, padded to the security screen, and there they were, Gregory, Patricia, Andrew, and Claudia. Not in suits this time. Not in party dresses. In plain clothes, faces bare, eyes sharp. Open up, Andrew shouted at the camera, voice carrying through the intercom. We just want to talk, Margaret folded her arms. Talk at midnight is never just talk. I pressed the button. You're trespassing, leave. Gregory stepped closer, looking directly into the lens. You think you can cut us out, but blood doesn't disappear. You're Hartman, whether you like it or not. And Hartman's share. I almost smiled. Funny, for 15 years, you shared nothing with me. Claudia tried the softer angle, clutching a child's photo in her hand, pressing it against the bars. These are your nieces and nephews, she said, voice trembling with performance. Don't they deserve to know you? Don't they deserve support? There it was. Their last card. The children. The ones who hadn't been at the reunions. The ones who hadn't laughed when I was sent to the children's table. The ones who hadn't chosen exclusion but inherited it. Margaret muttered, they'll use anything. I took a deep breath, then spoke into the intercom. Send me the children's names. their schools, their needs. I'll cover tuition, healthcare, food, directly. But not a cent passes through you. And if you drag them here again at midnight, the offer disappears." Patricia's eyes widened. "That's cruel." "No," I said calmly. "That's daylight. You get nothing. They get everything." Andrew cursed under his breath. Gregory's jaw tightened. Claudia lowered the photo, realizing the weapon had been blunted. "You've poisoned her," Gregory spat at the camera, as if Eleanor's ghost were still alive inside the house. "No," I said softly. "She prepared me." Margaret disconnected the line, and the gate remained closed. Eventually, their car rolled away, headlights shrinking into the dark. I stood at the window for a long while after, the ruby ring glinting faintly in the glass. My heart wasn't racing, it was steady. For the first time, their drama felt smaller than the house, smaller than me. Later, I opened Record of Daylight and taped the printed still from the gate camera. Claudia's hand pressed against the bars, the photo of a child blurred but visible. Beneath it, I wrote, "They played their last card." I answered with conditions. Innocence will not pay for their mistakes. As I closed the book, the house exhaled with me. Eleanor's presence lingered, not as shadow, but as a reminder. Revenge wasn't always fire. Sometimes it was boundaries, written in ink, carved into gates, and kept with cameras rolling. And as dawn crept across the hills, I felt not haunted, not hunted, just free. The morning after their midnight visit, sunlight cut across the study like a blade. I sat at Eleanor's desk with the blue box open, papers spread in neat stacks. For years, that box had been a shield. Now it felt like a blueprint. I thought of Claudia's trembling voice, the photo of children pressed against iron bars. They hadn't been the ones who mocked me, excluded me, or left me at the margins of the family table. They were born into the pattern, not authors of it. I dialed Harold. "I want to set up a fund," I said, "separate from the Eleanor Grace Foundation. This one strictly for the Hartman children." He paused. "You're sure? They'll spin it as reconciliation." "They can spin what they want," I said. "The record will be clear. The money bypasses my parents, Andrew, Claudia. It goes straight to the kids. Their education, their health. No strings, no access. Direct daylight." Harold exhaled softly. "That's not just defense, that's legacy." By noon, the paperwork was drafted. By evening, I signed. The Hartman Children's Trust. Funded, documented, irrevocable. Margaret watched me tuck the signed trust into the Record of Daylight. "You're doing what they never could," she said. "What's that?" "Ending the cycle, choosing care without conditions." That night, I stood on the balcony, city lights flickering in the distance. Daniel joined me, hands in his pockets. "You realize this is your revenge," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Starting a trust?" "Yes," he said. "Because you showed them they have no power left. You closed the gate, but you opened a door where it mattered. They can't touch it, can't spin it, can't profit from it. That's justice that outlives them." I thought of the little girl at the children's table, clutching a plastic fork while her siblings laughed. I thought of the woman standing now, pen still stained with ink from a signature that shifted history. And for the first time, the memory didn't sting. It simply belonged to the record. Later, I wrote the final page of this chapter in Record of Daylight. They excluded me from their reunions. I excluded them from control. But the children, they inherit care, not neglect. That is my answer. That is my freedom. I closed the book, slid it back into the blue box, and turned off the lamp. The house breathed with me again. Not as fortress, not as witness, but as home. And as dawn rose over the hills, I understood. Eleanor had left me her strength. I had turned it into legacy. The Hartman's chapter was closed. Mine was just beginning. For weeks after the trust was filed, the gate stayed quiet. No headlights at midnight, no envelopes slipped beneath iron, No desperate voices through the intercom. At first, I braced for their next performance. But the silence stretched on, and eventually I realized it wasn't retreat. It was defeat. News of the Hartman Children's Trust spread faster than I anticipated. Local papers called it a bold gesture of redemption, though redemption wasn't what I sought. Business magazines ran features about family-proof philanthropy. Even tabloids couldn't twist it. The structure was airtight, the money untouchable by the very people who had tried to manipulate me. One afternoon, Margaret found me in the study, sunlight pouring across the desk, where the blue box sat closed. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "They won't try again," she said simply. "You sound certain." "I've cleaned their kind of mess before," she said. "People who live on manipulation only know two speeds, noise or silence. When the noise fails, silence is all that's left." Her words stayed with me. Silence had once been my greatest wound. The silence of unanswered phone calls, the silence at the empty chair, the silence of parents who left a note instead of a presence. But now silence was proof of something else, boundaries that held. That night, I stood on the balcony as dusk bled into the city lights. Daniel joined me, slipping his hand into mine. "So this is it?" he asked. "The end?" I thought about it. The lawsuits dismissed, the gala spectacle exposed, the trust signed, the gates secure. "Yes," I said. "It's the end of their story and mine, but it's the beginning of something better." Below, the security cameras blinked their steady red dots. Not guardians against ghosts anymore. Just quiet reminders that history was being recorded in real time. I opened my record of daylight for what might be the last entry. On the fresh page I wrote, "They tried to rewrite history with theater and threats. I answered with records and light." The silence that follows is not emptiness. It is peace. I closed the book, slid it into the shelf beside Eleanor's blue box, and felt the weight lift from my chest. Outside, the hills exhaled. Inside, the house no longer waited for conflict. It simply waited for life. And for the first time in decades, I was ready to live it. Spring arrived at Hawthorne Ridge, with blossoms opening across the gardens Eleanor once walked. The house no longer felt like a fortress braced for siege. It felt like a place designed for beginnings. I spent mornings at the foundation offices drafting new grants, afternoons at Heart Secure, where transparency had become our signature, investors praising the culture I once thought was just stubbornness. Evenings belonged to walks with Daniel, where silence no longer carried fear, but ease. One Saturday, I stood in the great hall, where portraits of Hartmans hung in heavy frames. For years, I'd avoided their gaze, but now I studied them calmly. Men and women who believed legacy was inheritance, that power was bloodline. I had proved them wrong. Legacy was presence. Power was earned. I removed one portrait, the stern face of Gregory's father, and replaced it with a photograph of Margaret Grace, my grandmother, holding a book in one hand and my 9-year-old self in the other. Below it, I hung a small plaque. She showed up. The next week, the first reports from the Hartman Children's Trust arrived. Tuition paid, therapy sessions covered, groceries delivered. For once, the family name was attached to care instead of cruelty. They would never thank me for it, but it didn't matter. The cycle was broken. On a quiet evening, I opened the record of daylight one final time. My last entry was short. They left me silence. I built my voice. They left me exclusion. I built my own table. They left me empty chairs. I filled them with presence. I closed the book and placed it in Eleanor's blue box, not as a shield anymore, but as history, finished, preserved, complete. On the balcony, Daniel asked, "Do you ever wonder if they'll try again?" I smiled, watching the hills burn gold in sunset. If they do, they'll find the same gate, the same rules, and the same answer. But I think they've already learned silence suits them better. He wrapped an arm around me. The night settled, And for the first time in my life, the future wasn't something I was defending. It was something I was writing. The Hartman story had ended. Isabella Hartman's story, mine, was just beginning.